My brother got my wife pregnant. My own parents stood by their side and expected me to forgive them, so I cut them all off forever. I took back everything I had built, and let silence quietly destroy their entire world. I've never been the type to lead with emotion. Never have been. Growing up, I watched my father charm entire rooms with a smile while secretly driving our family into debt behind closed doors. That taught me early on. Feelings without strategy are nothing but noise. By the time I was 32, I'd built an investment advisory practice from scratch, absorbed control of my family's struggling logistics company, without making a single announcement about it, and married a woman I genuinely believed was my equal in every way that mattered. 14 years. That's not a relationship. That's a life. Muriel was working as a high-end interior stylist when we met. She had this precision about her. The way she'd walk into a space and immediately understand what was wrong with it. I respected that. We built something real together. Not flashy real, but solid real. The kind of life where you don't have to perform for each other at the end of the day. We had a main house, a guest house on the property that we occasionally rented to family, 2 cars, 1 dog that died 3 years in, and a social life built around people who actually earned their seats at the table. I also had Ronan. My younger brother is the kind of person who makes a great first impression and a terrible long-term investment. Always has been. He runs a commercial interior contracting firm, or ran one, I should say, and he spent the better part of his adult life operating on borrowed money, borrowed credibility, and borrowed time. I never resented him for it. I just kept quiet tabs, because that's what you do when you're the one the family leans on. For 11 months before everything broke, I noticed something shifting in Muriel. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden coldness, no explicit fights, just a series of small subtractions. The eye contact shortened. Conversations that used to run long started ending efficiently. Her phone was always either face down or in her hand, never just sitting out of the way it used to. She started going to bed earlier. Started taking longer to respond to messages I could see she'd read. I didn't confront her. That's not how I operate. I watched, cataloged, and waited. Then came a Thursday afternoon in late October. A deal I was managing closed 2 hours ahead of schedule, so I left the office early. No announcement, no text home. I pulled into the driveway, noticed Ronan's car parked along the side. Not unusual. He stopped by occasionally. Grabbed my bag and let myself in through the side entrance. I heard voices in the kitchen. Not loud, not alarmed, intimate. I set my bag down on the hallway table without a sound, and moved toward the kitchen doorway. I don't know exactly what I expected. Maybe them talking. Maybe something I could explain away. What I saw didn't require any explanation. Ronan had her against the counter, not violently, not urgently, but with the casual comfort of someone who had been in that position before. Muriel's forehead was close to his, and she was talking. Low, deliberate, like she was making sure the words landed. The baby is yours, Ronan. You know that. I stood there for maybe 4 seconds. I know it was 4 because I counted them without meaning to. Something in my brain just started running numbers. Then I stepped back. Picked up my bag from the hallway table. Walked out the same door I came in. I drove to the office, sat at my desk, and didn't move for 40 minutes. No call. No text. I just sat there while the building emptied out around me and the light changed through the windows. Around 8 p.m., I opened my laptop. I have a document, a private one, encrypted, updated quarterly, that maps the full architecture of every asset, account, holding entity, and financial structure connected to my name. It includes things most people in my life don't know exist, let alone understand. I built it over years, not as a weapon, but because I'm a person who believes in knowing exactly where everything stands. I opened it that night and read through it slowly, all of it. Then I opened a new tab and started making notes. 2 days later, my mother called and invited me to dinner. She said it casually, like she was asking me to pick up groceries. I said yes, without hesitation. I should have known what kind of table I was walking into. The 2 days between that Thursday and my mother's dinner were the strangest of my life, not because I fell apart, but because I didn't. I went back home that night and slept in the guest room, which I'd done occasionally when work ran late, so Muriel didn't read anything into it. In the morning, I was up before her, coffee made, out the door before 7. We exchanged maybe 12 words. She seemed distracted. I seemed normal. Neither of us was performing. We were just 2 people who had silently agreed, without saying a single word, to let the next few days breathe before anything got complicated. I use those days well. I have a contact, I'll just call him a professional, who handles discrete information gathering for high-stakes situations. I've referred clients to him twice over the years. I called him Friday morning, gave him the relevant names, and by Sunday evening I had a confirmed timeline, 11 months. It had been going on for 11 months. They'd been careful about location, but not careful enough about pattern. Same windows of time, same overlapping absences. The pregnancy put her at roughly 14 weeks, which aligned without any ambiguity. So, by the time my mother's call came Sunday night, I wasn't operating on suspicion anymore. I was operating on facts. Vivian, my mother, has a voice that's always carried a certain management quality to it, like she's conducting a meeting she's already decided the outcome of. She's warm, but efficiently warm. The invitation was casual in tone, but slightly too deliberate in timing, and I registered that. I said yes anyway. I wanted to know exactly what version of this they'd constructed. I arrived at my parents' house Monday evening to find the table set for 3, not 4, 3. Ronan wasn't there, which told me this wasn't a confrontation. This was a presentation. My father, Oren, met me at the door with a handshake that lingered a half-second longer than usual and poured me a drink before I even sat down. Good whiskey. The kind he brings out when he wants something. We made maybe 5 minutes of surface conversation, how work was going, something about the weather, and then Vivian set down her glass and looked at me with a measured calm of someone who had rehearsed what came next. She told me that Ronan and Muriel had developed feelings for each other over the past year, that it wasn't planned, that these things happen, and the family had spent a lot of time discussing what the right path forward looked like. She said the word love once, carefully, like she was placing a fragile object on a shelf. Then she got to the pregnancy. She framed it as a blessing. An unexpected one, but a blessing. Ronan was ready to step up. Muriel was committed to building something stable. And the family, she used the word we, plural, like all of this had been voted on, felt that the healthiest outcome for everyone, especially the child, was for Ronan and Muriel to have a foundation to build from. That's when Oren leaned forward. He asked me, in the most reasonable tone he could manufacture, whether I would consider letting Ronan and Muriel move into the guest house on my property. Familiar surroundings, stability for the baby, family close by. He made it sound almost generous, like he was offering me the chance to do something meaningful. The room went quiet. I've sat across from difficult people in difficult rooms my entire professional life. I know what it looks like when someone mistakes your composure for compliance. Both of them were watching me with this barely concealed relief, like the hard part was over now that they'd said it out loud. I took a slow sip of the whiskey my father poured, let the silence sit for a moment. And then I smiled. Not a polite smile, a real one. The kind that comes from a place they didn't have access to. I said, I'll think about it. Vivian's shoulders dropped about half an inch. Oren nodded like we'd reached an agreement. They moved on to dinner like men move on from signed contracts. I ate well, made easy conversation, and drove home at 9. The moment I got in the car, I pulled up a contact in my phone I hadn't called in over a year. My personal attorney. Not the family's, mine. He picked up on the second ring. Start the audit, I said. Everything. What I didn't know yet was exactly how deep the architecture ran, and how completely they'd all failed to understand who built it in the first place. My attorney's name is Callum. He's been practicing for 23 years, and has the kind of unhurried precision that only comes from watching people destroy themselves in courtrooms long enough to stop being surprised by any of it. When I say he's my attorney and not the family's, I mean that in the most structural sense possible. He has never billed a single hour to anyone named Calloway except me. And I've made sure that boundary never blurred. He spent the first week doing exactly what I asked. A full audit. Every entity, every account, every agreement, where my name appeared, alongside someone else's. I already knew the broad picture, but I needed it documented by someone whose signature meant something if it ever ended up in front of a judge. What came back confirmed what I already understood, but it never needed to weaponize. 6 years earlier, when Oren's gambling had quietly brought the logistics company to within 4 months of insolvency, it was me who stepped in. No announcement. No family meeting. I negotiated directly with the creditors, restructured the company's debt, and in doing so, through a clean, fully documented, legally executed transfer, absorbed majority ownership. Oren stayed on as operational director because he genuinely knew the business, and because removing him publicly would have raised questions I didn't want to answer at the time. He continued running daily operations. He signed off on shipments, managed staff, attended industry events. He just stopped being the owner. He never quite registered the distinction because I never forced him to confront it. That was my error in judgment, not the legal structure. The assumption that people don't need to understand what they've lost if they still feel like they have it. Ronan's penthouse was a different situation. 3 years back, he'd come to me needing capital for the purchase. He didn't want a loan. He wanted a structure that kept the transaction off his credit profile while he was in the middle of securing contracts. I set it up through one of my holding companies with a residential agreement that outlined specific conditions under which the asset would transfer fully to his name. It was generous. It was also contractual. And Ronan, being Ronan, signed where I told him to sign without reading the sections that mattered. None of those conditions had been met. The asset was still mine. Muriel's situation required the least investigation. Every premium account, every card, every membership she used daily, All of it ran through structures I controlled. She had her own income from styling work, but it had tapered significantly over the past few years, as she'd leaned further into the life my income made possible. She wasn't without resources. She just didn't have the resources she thought she had. Callum laid all of this out in a clean summary document and asked me how I wanted to proceed. I told him I wanted to move carefully and in sequence. Nothing sudden, nothing that could be characterized as reactive or retaliatory. Every action had to be something I was fully entitled to take, just executed on my timeline, not theirs. The first thing I did was call Vivian and tell her I was still considering the guest house arrangement. I kept my voice warm and slightly distracted, like a man turning an idea over genuinely. She thanked me and said Ronan would be relieved to hear it. I said I just wanted to make sure it was the right thing for everyone. While that call was still warm in her memory, I was on the phone with a commercial property attorney reclassifying the guest house as a standalone rental unit under a separate entity with zero family exposure. It took 8 days. Nobody noticed. I was 3 weeks into the process when Ronan texted me. Casual, warm in that manufactured way of his. Asked if we could grab a drink and talk things through like men. I read it once, set the phone down, and kept working. I had nothing to say to him that wasn't already being said through documentation. But the next morning, I found something that shifted my pace. A forwarded email sent to me by a mutual contact who thought I should know, showing that Ronan had been quietly reaching out to people in our shared professional circle, trying to get a read on what I was doing. Specifically, whether I'd been meeting with attorneys. Someone had talked. Not Callum. Someone peripheral. Someone careless. Ronan wasn't panicking yet, but he was starting to look around, which meant my window was narrowing. And I still had 4 dominoes left to push. I moved the timeline up by 10 days. Not because I panicked. I didn't. But there's a difference between patience and hesitation. And the moment Ronan started sniffing around my professional contacts, the calculus shifted. He wasn't going to find anything actionable. Everything I was doing was clean and within my rights. But if he found enough pieces early enough, he might lawyer up properly, and a halfway decent attorney could slow certain processes down long enough to complicate them. I wasn't willing to give him that window. So, I called Callum on a Wednesday morning and told him to begin sequencing the moves. Controlled, ordered, no single action dramatic enough to look like an attack, just a man reorganizing his affairs. Completely and permanently. The accounts went first. Muriel's primary card stopped working on a Thursday afternoon. I know the exact moment because, as I mentioned, one of her friends reached out to me 2 days later, asking carefully whether everything was all right at home. Apparently, Muriel had been at a home goods store with 2 friends when the transaction declined, then the backup card, then the third. She'd had to call one of the friends to cover the purchase. I thanked the friend for reaching out and told her we were going through some changes. I kept it vague. She filled in the rest herself. I didn't enjoy that moment. I want to be clear about that. There was nothing satisfying about imagining it. But I also didn't reverse it. What I felt was closer to a kind of finality, the clean snap of something that had already been broken being officially acknowledged as broken. Ronan's notice came next. Callum sent the formal dissolution of the residential agreement on a Friday, registered mail, with a follow-up email copy to ensure receipt. 30 days to vacate. Clean, legal, unambiguous. Ronan called me 40 minutes after the email landed. I watched the phone ring and didn't answer. He called 3 more times in the following hour. The 5th attempt was a text, all capitals, which told me everything I needed to know about where his composure had gone. I sent back a single line, "Talk to your attorney." He didn't have a good one. He had a guy he used for contract disputes who was competent enough in that lane, but completely unprepared for what Callum had put together. They exchanged letters for 2 weeks. Nothing came of it. The agreement was airtight. The logistics company required the most precision. I sent formal notice to the board, my board, as it turned out, that I would be assuming active operational oversight, effective immediately. I wasn't removing Ronan. I was simply becoming visible in a structure I'd always controlled. He was informed by letter, and by a follow-up call from Callum that laid out the ownership documentation with quiet clarity. Ronan didn't call me. He called Vivian. She called me 3 times that evening. I let them all go to voicemail and listened to each one carefully before deleting them. Within the company, 2 senior employees who had grown increasingly frustrated with Ronan's habit of wandering into operational decisions he had no formal standing to make, expensing meals, redirecting small contracts toward firms he had personal arrangements with. We came forward once I opened the floor. I showed them the documented history. They formally withdrew from any arrangement connected to Ronan the same week. Then I dealt with his investor situation. Ronan had been courting a group of 4 private investors for a new contracting venture. I prepared a briefing, factual, documented, sourced entirely from records I had legitimate access to, covering 2 years of financial misrepresentations he'd made in connection with projects that touched the logistics company's network. It was sent anonymously from a blind channel. I don't know exactly how each of the 4 responded. I know that within 8 days, 3 of them had quietly withdrawn from the deal. The 4th stopped returning his calls shortly after. His contracting firm had no new capital, no penthouse, and no silent infrastructure holding it upright. It took less than 3 weeks to dismantle what had taken me years to build for people who never once asked how it stayed standing. Then Callum called me with news I hadn't expected. My parents had retained an attorney. They were exploring whether my actions constituted retaliatory conduct, and whether Muriel's pregnancy created any claims against the marital asset structure I'd unwound. I listened to all of it without interrupting. Then I asked Callum one question. When is the Meridian Gala? He paused. 5 weeks out. Good, I said. Get me extra time on the program. I'd like to say a few words. He was quiet for a moment before he answered. Are you sure you want to do this publicly? I told him I'd never been more sure of anything. 5 weeks is enough time to prepare something that lasts. I want to explain what the Meridian Charity Gala actually is, because the setting matters. It's not a casual fundraiser with a cash bar and a DJ. It's the kind of event where the city's real infrastructure shows up. Commercial developers, civic figures, old money, new money, local press. The kind of attorneys and financiers who quietly decide which projects get funded, and which reputations get extended credit. The Calloway family had been a presenting sponsor for consecutive years. It was the one public stage where the family name carried genuine weight. They assumed I would either skip it or attend and behave. I reached out to the gala's lead organizer, a woman named Petra who had coordinated the event for the past 7 years and had always treated me with the kind of direct respect I returned easily. I told her I wanted additional speaking time this year. I had something meaningful I wanted to address. She asked no questions and adjusted the program. That's what happens when you've been the one actually writing the checks for over a decade. 2 days before the event, I met with 2 financial journalists separately, same afternoon, different coffee shops. I handed each of them a document package compiled by Callum, verified independently, containing a clear and sourced account of how the logistics company's resources had been misused over an extended period, and the financial misrepresentations Ronan had made to investors and partners who operated within the company's network. I told both of them they could publish after the evening of the gala, not before. They agreed. Good journalists recognize a structured story when it lands in front of them. I arrived at the venue alone, black tie, no date. I didn't need the visual of moving on. I needed the visual of someone who required nothing from the room to feel grounded in it. I spotted my parents near the entrance within 30 seconds of walking in. Vivian saw me first. Her hand found Oren's arm immediately, which told me they'd spent the past 5 weeks rehearsing for this encounter without fully deciding what they wanted from it. Oren gave me a nod that tried to land somewhere between authority and reconciliation. I returned it neutrally and kept moving. Ronan was there, too. He'd worn a suit I didn't recognize. New, expensive, which meant borrowed or charged to something already over-leveraged. He looked like a man trying to project normalcy so hard that it became its own kind of distress signal. We made eye contact once across the room. He held it for a moment, then looked away first. Muriel wasn't there. The pregnancy was the stated reason. I'd heard this through a mutual acquaintance earlier in the week, and registered it without reaction. The first hour was cocktails and the particular performance of ease that people in rooms like this have perfected. Ronan approached me twice. The first time, I redirected him toward a conversation with someone nearby before he could build momentum. The second time I excused myself to greet Petra, which was genuine. I wanted to confirm my slot on the program and the order of the evening. When my name was called, the room received me warmly. These were people who had watched me operate for years. Whatever they'd heard through the social channels, and in a city this networked, they'd heard something. They hadn't heard my version yet. I opened with a genuine acknowledgement of what the gala represented, and what it had meant to my family to be part of it for 11 years. I meant that part. Then I paused long enough for the room to register that the tone was shifting. I announced my resignation from the Calloway Logistics Company, effective that evening, formally, completely. I thanked the employees by name. Several of them were in the room, who had served the company with integrity through years that were harder than the public face of the operation ever suggested. And then I started talking about what those years actually looked like. I didn't editorialize. I didn't perform outrage. I walked the room through a factual account of how close the company came to collapse, who restructured it, and how certain individuals had used the company's network to misrepresent their own standing to investors and partners who deserved accurate information. I didn't mention Muriel. I didn't mention the affair. I didn't need to. The room had gone very quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when people are recalculating in real time. I was stepping back from the podium when I heard the commotion from the left side of the room. Ronan was moving toward the stage, not walking, moving. And the 2 security staff near the perimeter reached him before he got within 10 feet of the steps. It wasn't graceful. He went down to one knee, then was held there. loud and stripped of every layer of composure he'd managed to hold for the past hour. Then from somewhere near the back of the room, she had apparently arrived late and been standing there long enough to watch the whole speech. Muriel screamed his name, not a gasp, a full, raw scream that pulled every remaining eye in the room toward her. I picked up my portfolio from the podium and walked toward the exit. I was maybe 30 feet from the door when I heard my father's voice cut through the noise. Calloway. Just my name. Across a room of 200 people that had gone almost completely silent, I stopped walking, stood still, didn't turn around. 3 seconds. I counted them the same way I counted the seconds in my kitchen doorway 8 weeks earlier. Then I pushed open the door and walked out into the night. And that's where everything I'd built finally finished falling. The stories published the following morning. Both journalists ran their pieces before 9 a.m. One in the city's primary business publication, one through a financial news outlet with a regional readership that carried more weight than its size suggested. Neither piece was sensational. They didn't need to be. The documentation spoke in the flat, damning language that financial journalism does best: figures, dates, names, patterns. Ronan's contracting firm was named specifically in connection with misrepresented investor relationships and the misuse of resources within the logistics company's network. By noon, my phone had received 41 messages. I read all of them and replied to 3. 2 from employees of the logistics company who deserved a direct response, and 1 from Petra, who simply said she respected what I'd done and hoped I was all right. I told her I was. The legal threat from my parents went nowhere. Their attorney assessed the documentation Callum had assembled and advised them, correctly, that every action I'd taken was within my legal rights as the majority owner of the relevant entities. There was no case. The letter informing them of this arrived 4 weeks after the gala. I know because Callum told me. I didn't read it myself. Ronan's contracting firm folded within 2 months. Without the investor capital, without the penthouse that had served as his most visible proof of stability, and without the logistics company's network quietly underpinning his professional credibility, there was nothing left to hold the structure upright. His reputation in the local contracting world, which runs almost entirely on referrals and relationships, collapsed faster than I anticipated. By the time spring came, I heard through a mutual contact that he'd relocated to another region entirely, and was working under someone else's firm, junior level, starting over in a city where nobody knew his name yet. Muriel's divorce was finalized in under 6 weeks. My attorney had structured the marital assets with enough clarity over the years that there was very little to argue about. She received what was legally and documentably hers. Nothing I'd built before the marriage, nothing held within my corporate entities, nothing that required a protracted negotiation to untangle. She retained her styling credentials, and whatever client relationships she'd maintained. She had a path forward. It just wasn't the path she'd been standing on. I heard she moved into a smaller place on the other side of the city. I didn't look into it further. That part of the map was no longer mine to read. My parents settled into a quieter version of their life. Oren retained his operational role at the company under my restructured oversight. I kept the arrangement because I'm not interested in cruelty, only in clarity. He runs what he always ran. He just no longer operates under any illusion about who owns it. Vivian stopped calling after the 3rd month. Their social standing in the circles they'd spent decades cultivating took the kind of hit that doesn't fully recover, not because of anything scandalous, but because people in those circles are precise about who they align with, and the alignment had publicly shifted. That was 3 years ago. I bought a different property, smaller than the estate, fully mine in every sense, no history embedded in the walls. I expanded the advisory practice into a proper independent firm with 4 people I trust completely. The work is better than it's ever been, which I attribute partly to the fact that I'm no longer allocating any portion of my attention to holding other people's lives together. The messages still come. My parents, on holidays and occasionally between them. Ronan, in cycles. Anger first, then something that sounds like pleading. And once, about 8 months ago, something that read almost like genuine accountability. I read that one twice, then I archived it with the rest. Muriel wrote to me once, 3 months after the divorce was finalized, a short message. She asked if I was okay. That one nearly got a reply. I sat with it for a long time. Not out of residual feeling, but because it was the only communication from any of them that seemed to be asking about me rather than asking for something from me. In the end, I decided that the distinction, however real, didn't change enough to matter. I didn't reply. People ask me sometimes, colleagues who know the broad outline, friends who were there for pieces of it, whether I regret how it ended, whether I wish I'd handled it differently, whether any version of this could have gone another way. The honest answer is that it ended exactly the way it was always going to end once I understood what I was actually dealing with. I didn't blow up 14 years in a moment of anger. I spent 8 weeks making sure that every person who had decided I was a foundation they could build on, while discarding the person attached to it, understood, permanently and without ambiguity, What it looks like when that foundation withdraws its support. I regret the 14 years only in the sense that I wish I'd seen it sooner. Not the marriage, not the family, the pattern. The quiet, practiced assumption that my patience had no limit, and my awareness had no depth. I know better now. I keep that spreadsheet updated still. Old habit. But these days when I open it, every line on it belongs entirely to me. That's not a small thing. That's everything. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you really like our videos, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Have a great day.